We're going to talk about those ceremonies in this class. So eventually you will know what each ceremony is and why they're titled. That way, the Uep is one of them. So you'll get a good...
They called the guy, the medicine man before me, they called him the
Yeah, that's where I misunderstood. Was that the name for medicine man, or was that the ceremony?
It's the name of the ceremony, because they wrap him up. Uep means you wrap something up. That's what Uep means. So when a medicine man does that particular ceremony, they will put a blanket over his head, fold it here, and before they do that, he'll put his hands in behind his back like this. And every set is tied together. So all 5 sets will be tied together behind his back. And then his wrist will be tied together. And then they put this quilt over him, close it here and tie it on the neck. And they have 7 ties down to his ankle. So he's completely covered with this quilt. And then they'll lay him down. If the ceremony goes well, the spirit comes in and they'll untie him. And they said the Uep, they call him Uep because they're the ones who are wrapped up. And I've known quite a few, not a lot, but I know some who came to this class and talk about their ceremony. And they said sometimes the spirit will come in and just go like that, and everything's off.
Wow.
The robe, blanket, and lights are turned on, and the blanket will be just folded neatly, rope all coiled. And you have to have tobacco ties, over 400 around. And those will be all into a tight ball. You know, spirits will do that. It's a very powerful ceremony. And usually the spirit might be the coyote. Or one time, sometimes it's Ia, the stone. The stone, Ia, they have spirits. So once in a while you might find a perfectly round pebble that has some spirit in it. So we carry stones around as relatives, you know. I feel comfort knowing I have a relative with me, you know. So sometimes I carry. It could be done for any purpose. The other night, they doctored me. When I came back from Mayo, this one of my adopted nephews does Uep. When he heard what happened to me, he said, "I'll come down and do a ceremony for you." So we had it in this next building, in the basement. And his spirits came in, they doctored me, and they gave me medicine. And one came around and touched me all over with a gourd and opened my mouth and stuck a piece of medicine in my mouth. And he told me who the spirit was. Another one came and he said, there's a little grandma that comes to his ceremonies. And here she came. And when the guys were singing, well, she sang with them. She has a beautiful voice. She really sang with the singers, you know. And So it could be any purpose. What they did with this Uep man was they asked him to find Albert. So that was the purpose of the ceremony. But the one I had was for doctoring. One they had for Albert was to find him, see where he's at.
Neither one of them are wrong either.
Yeah. And they, so any medicine man, we'll talk more about that protocol, the process you go through. And they'll tell you how they become a medicine man. They'll explain that in the ceremony. And when the spirits come in, they come in with little lights. And then you hear the eagle bone whistle, gourds going around. And that means that the spirits are present. And after those series of songs, the medicine man will get up and he will introduce the spirits. So you know, in English we call them animal, you know. He said, this is the eagle spirit, and his name is, and tell you, you know. This is the black-tailed deer spirit, and he will tell you his name. So the spirits are these certain beings, we call them relatives, that come into, and they come because they know the environment. They know the plants. They said a long time ago they used to have a medicine man who worked with prairie dogs. And his medicine was really strong because the prairie dog knows all the plants. You know? So if you have certain kind of sickness, he'll say this particular plant will help you. So that's how they work with other spirits. So the spirits are, we know who they are, we know what they are. It's not a mystery. And they didn't come to scare you or hurt you. I mean, they come in real noisy, you know. And if you've never been to one, you're going to be scared at first. But they're there to help. They come to help. So you always feel that comfort, knowing they're not there to hurt you. The little ceremony we tried in schools, and it seems to be helping, but more of it has to be done, and that's wiping with tears ceremony. When when a person dies, there's 4 days. 4 days that you really have to watch what you say or do in those 4 days. Because whatever you're doing in those 4 days could become part of your life. And they call that Aya Ichia. There was a time when somebody dies, people used to drink. It looked like it just continues, that drinking. It's also a time when you can break a bad habit. If you have a bad habit that you want to get rid of, during those 4 days, you address that. The spirit of the deceased will help you address that. So 4 days after death are really important. And then after the funeral, usually you wait a few days and bring in as many family members as you can. Or sometimes we're scattered all over today, so sometimes somebody representing the family, you'll bring him in and offer them smoke and water. Now, smoke helps you deal with the pain and the grief. It helps you take that away. I mean, you'll never forget a loved one. But you need to let them go on that journey. And that smoke will help you. You take that water as medicine. When you do that ceremony, it frees you to come back to the public in a good way. Because sometimes death will hold you back. And it's hard to get back into public setting again. So this little ceremony helps you to deal with that. Sometimes people will cut their hair as a sign of mourning. When you do that, that means you're going to mourn for a year. So you're not supposed to go to public events, social gatherings, anything like that. You stay away from those things for 1 year. At the end of the year, you release the spirit and you come back. Sometimes an older person is loved very much. The family might take a lock of hair and keep the spirit for 1 year. You designate a place for that spirit. Today we have houses with so many rooms. You can designate a room for that spirit to stay. Somebody has to stay with that spirit every day. You give them water. When you have a nice meal, you feed them. At the end of the year, you bring the relatives back together, friends, and you have one last meal with the spirit. And then you release them. When you don't do any of these things, they said the spirit just roams around wherever he or she dies. The spirit will just hang around there. Once in a while, you'll see these spirits. Today we call them ghosts and become afraid of them. You know? A very close friend of yours or relatives who's very dear to you dies, and all of a sudden he or she becomes a ghost and you're afraid. Because that's the way we're conditioned. So sometimes the spirits will hang around until you do a ceremony. They said people who died in car accidents or killed or commit suicide, their spirits just hang around in that place because they shortened their lives. And they show themselves once in a while to tell us that they're starving. Not just for food, but prayers. And they said the earth is full of spirits roaming around. Because there's a lot of spirits, people died, that nothing's been done for them. So their spirits are just roaming the earth. It's a real comforting practice when you do something like this, when you lose a loved one.
What would you call this ceremony?
Wiping of the tears. That's when you wipe the tears of the people in mourning. And the other one is wanachi gluhapi, keeping the spirit. You keep that spirit for 1 year.
Okay, so that 1 year is keeping the spirit?
Yeah, keeping the spirit. You can do that for 1 year. Long time ago, they put the body on a scaffold or on a big tree off the ground. Eventually, it falls. Everything they use is biodegradable. The robe, clothing, everything is biodegradable, so it returns to dust. Said the badger comes out and eats the bones. A year or two later, the family will come back to that part and clean that area out. So you never knew somebody's body was left there. You will never find the remains of your great-great-grandparents because they all returned to the earth that way. When the reservations were established, missionaries came in, that's when they forced our people to bury. I was watching a funeral of somebody who was very loved. Steel casket and concrete, rough box. I was thinking, I wonder how many thousands of years that body's going to lay there in that concrete. But that's one ceremony that is really important, I think, especially with kids. Kids really don't know what to do when somebody dies in a family. And if the schools can do a little wiping of tears ceremony for them, I think that's going to make them feel a little better, you know. You don't have to have a medicine man to do that. Just get somebody older who knows what's going on, ask him to do it. It's a very simple ceremony, and yet it's very meaningful to know.
Would it be like having a 4-day wait?
I think they still do that today, 4 days wait.
So that's kind of like wiping of the tears?
Well, in those 4 days, what they did was, a long time ago, they didn't embalm people.
Right.
And people were in what they call a comatose, and they've come back to life. So that's why they have a wake for 4 days, in case that happens, that they might come back to life. But with embalming, you know you're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they drain the blood out of you, so. So in the wakes anymore, sometimes they do it to get relatives together to remember the good times with the deceased, to share, and if anything, to support each other, to comfort each other, to deal with the loss. So there are many reasons for the wake. But a long time ago, when somebody dies, immediately they will put him on a scaffold or tree. And I just had to laugh one time. I was watching a Western movie, and they showed a traditional Indian burial ground. Nothing but rows and rows of scaffolds. I don't know. They create a lot of things around us, you know. That's one ceremony that we still practice today. The other one is Hookah. Hookah is making of a relative. There was a story of two groups, a tribe from the southwest and one of our divisions had a conflict. And the next step was going to be warfare. So they decided to meet one more time, told each other to bring their most powerful object. Lakota people brought the pipe. The Southwest people brought the corn and the corn pollen. They took a buffalo skull and set both on that skull, and they met. So when the meeting was over, they renewed their relationship. They readopted each other as relatives. And that's where making of relatives come from. Sometimes there's a conflict and you bring the two together to renew that relationship with each other instead of fighting. No. today, they call that ceremony in a way of naming a child. When you have a child, whenever you are prepared, there's no time limit that says you have to do it at this time, but whenever you are well prepared, you designate that day to give your child a name. You will approach a relative who will be a role model for your child. If it's a girl, you approach a woman to be the role model for that girl. If it's a boy, then you usually approach a man. You give them a year to prepare themselves. And you prepare yourself. At the end of the year, you bring relatives, friends together. For a girl, you bring an eagle plume. For a boy, it's an eagle feather. The sponsor will take that feather and they'll sing what they call a Hookah Song. And the song simply says, Le Hunkaye, this is my relative. To the west, this is my relative. So you announce with that song to all the directions, 4 directions above and below, that today you're making a relative. When the song is done, you say a little prayer and tie the feather on the child. I think for the eagle plume, you usually tie it on the left side. For the boy, it's usually on the right side. And then you announce the name.
What if somebody who wanted to give you their Indian name before they passed away to carry on that name, then when they passed away, then there's no way of doing it?
You can still do it. If people know that, have that knowledge, then they can announce that. This was the person's wish. Like my sister wanted to give my wife her Indian name, but she says, I'm never prepared enough. I never have enough to do it. So when she died, I, in her honor, passed the name on to my wife.
Yeah, because we were even in the process of, we were even doing stuff for giveaway too.
Uh-huh.
For the naming.
So just announce this is the wish of the person. And you're carrying on his or her wishes. And that's how you continue those names too. So they call that hookah, making of a relative, but it's really a naming ceremony. Sometimes a name will come back from the family tree. You might not hear a name for 4 generations, and it's come back to the child. Somebody remembers that name, and you bring it back to the child. So this is how names are carried on in a Tiospa. Or sometimes you sponsor a ceremony and ask the spirits to name your child. So what happens is at the naming ceremony, you put on a feed You put on a big feast, and you collect items for what they call a giveaway. Household items and things like that. And what happens is, sometimes I watch a child, people will come and they'll call somebody, here's a gift. Person will come and take the gift and come and shake hands with the child. And the child is probably wondering why, you know. What they're teaching that child is, today they honor you and they're giving you a name. So this is what you do as a way of saying thank you. So the child is taught how to give thanks. Every time you're honored, you give something in return. How many of you have been to a graduation where you are honored for graduating? That's your way of saying thank you for being acknowledged. You know, when relatives coming, you're giving something in return. So this is a way of teaching generosity to the people. And sometimes you don't have much. You do the best you can. Most importantly, you're feeding the people. That's important. You know, you do the best you can. One time Lionel was asking me, he said, sometimes he hates to go to these occasions because he knows people have a hard time. They struggle. He said he went to one and they gave him a beautiful star quilt. And I know they don't have much. And I said, I don't know what to think. I said, well, did you take it? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm glad you did. Because the worst thing you can do is to refuse a gift. Maybe they don't have much, but they do what they can to honor somebody. And I said, they respect you. That's why they give you that gift. So if anything, you should be happy and thankful. So all these little things are involved in when you do a ceremony, you know. It's not just a tradition, you know. There's a reason for that. There's spiritual connections, there's relationship. You are renewing relationships with these ceremonies. And the children see that. And sometimes kids just play around, but when you talk about it, they listen. One of my daughters was about 5 years old. I used to have a summer institute for the college at my place. So about the third week, I had to do something, so I told the participants, I said, I want you guys to set it up. So we'll have a sweat ceremony tonight. I came back that afternoon and here they had a fire going. So I said, well, thank you for setting it up. And they all kind of felt a little embarrassed, looked at each other. And finally one of them said, we didn't set it up. She said, we all came here and debated on how you do it, and this is the way it should be done. We were just arguing, debating on how it should be done. Said, your daughter came over and set it up and started the fire. And she was only 5 years old, you know. And I never taught them those things. But they watch. And that's how they learn. You know. So when you do these things, with an open mind, without fear, it makes a difference with the kids. But when you do something and you're nervous and afraid, it's going to have an impact on the kids. They'll be wondering, I wonder why she's afraid, you know. So you should do it just wholeheartedly. And if you make a mistake, that's what it is, a mistake. We all make mistakes. And we laugh about it. That's the beauty of Lakota cultures, that we can laugh at ourselves, learn from that. So those are two ceremonies that we deal with the children. And, about spirits, naming. These are very human ceremonies, and sometimes it's wonderful if a medicine man is available and to help out, to come and pray. But to ask a medicine man for anything, it'd be a good idea for you to find out who the medicine men are. You know, get to know them. Get to know the family. See what kind of ceremonies they do. There's nothing wrong in asking questions of who they are, what they do. Once you get to know them, go to the one that you're most comfortable with. Because you're going to have to trust him. You're going to have to trust him and his family. So if you get to know them and get along with them, you go to them. First visit, you might just take him some coffee and some food and just visit with them. See what their ceremony is. How do you approach them? Most of them will tell you to bring a pipe. If you have a pipe, you load that pipe, you put 7 pinches of tobacco into that pipe. 1 pinch for the 6 directions, 7th one is why you're doing it. And after you put those prayers into that pipe, you roll a sage and cap it, so no other influence will get into that pipe. That sage will protect it. You take that to a medicine man and say, I brought you an opari, a pipe offering, for this reason. And you tell them why you're bringing the pipe. Depending on why you want to do it, he can say yes or no. He has that option. If he takes the pipe and smokes it, that means he'll do the ceremony. So after he gets done with the smoking, ask him, what kind of offerings should I bring? He might say the 6 colors of the flags. If he says flags, That means the 6 colors of a cotton cloth: black, red, yellow, white, blue, and green. He said, bring those flags. In one corner of each flag, you put a tobacco bundle. Make a little tobacco bundle on one of the corners of each flag. Then they always ask for a red felt. And they all should be 1/4 yard long. All those flags. So they might ask for those flags. If they say, I want you to bring some flags, just ask them, what kind? What colors? How big? I know one guy, one medicine man, he said, instead of, I always thought it was 1/4 yard, but he said, no, it has to be a yard. So they all have different preference. And then any tobacco ties. And they'll tell you how many tobacco ties, what colors you should make. So the offerings are flags and tobacco ties of different colors. Different sets will go to different spirits. As an example, somebody might say, one of them said, I want 24 yellow and red ties on one string. That might go to the spider spirit. I want 24 blue and green. That might go to the eagle spirit. So each set will go to a different spirit. But he'll tell you that. You know, you should all write it down as you visit with him. All the offerings you need to bring. Then you ask him, how many people usually come? Because every time there's a ceremony, people hear about it and they come. If he says, usually about 20 people, then you bring enough food to feed 30 people. After each ceremony, when the ceremony is over, you feed all the participants. One of the medicine men I usually go to always says, whatever food you want to bring, but be sure and bring stew of buffalo tongue and kidneys, raw kidneys. So that's one thing he requires. So they all have a different request. And then some of them don't eat certain kind of meat. Like one medicine man I used to work with, he doesn't eat deer meat because one of his spirit friends is a deer. So he doesn't eat deer meat. Yeah. So you might ask him, just ask him those questions, you know. So when you come, you're pretty clear of what you should bring. And then whatever the ceremony is about, you pick the night, the day, time, and you have that ceremony that night. Few days after the first chance you get, you're going to do a Thanksgiving ceremony. Same amount of offerings for the ceremony. For the Thanksgiving ceremony, you make the same things. Flags, tobacco ties, food. And that's your way of saying thank you to the spirits. The ceremonies depend on what you want. sometimes in a healing ceremony, if it's a very serious sickness, the spirits might say, we have to doctor you 4 nights. So for 4 nights, every night you have to make those offerings. When the 4 nights are done, a few days after, first chance you get, you do a Thanksgiving again. So it could be time consuming, it took, takes time. You have to make time for it. And sometimes you need to have a sweat ceremony before each healing ceremony. Every ceremony is different. They'll tell you there's few things they don't do. One is they don't use their ceremonies to play with people. They don't use ceremonies to mess up somebody. They don't use ceremonies to break up marriages. Or they don't use ceremonies to have something bad happen. Those are things they'll tell you they don't do. It's an interesting, very intense or involved ceremonies. That's why I said, find out what the tradition is and how much involvement is in it, There are several ceremonies that we practice. The one we talked about beginning of the class was that Uep. That's another, and that could be used for different things. Mom was telling me one time, one of the uncles was a Uep. He does Uep ceremonies. And one night, this was like after a big blizzard, one of the relatives put on a ceremony and he said, my horses are gone. I don't know where they're at. And I wonder if your spirits could tell me where I can find them. So he did a Uep, and he said in those days they have a log house, one room, and then a big pot-belly stove. And they tied this man up and his uncle up, and he said they started the ceremony. And pretty soon there's a lot of racket in that stove, a lot of noise in that stove, and it was just quiet. They got done with all the singing. And it was just quiet. And here, my uncle pounded on the door and said, "Let me in." So they lit the lamp. He said the blanket was folded, rope was coiled, everything was nicely coiled, but he wasn't there. They opened the door and he walked in, and he was just covered with that black suit from stovepipe. He said, "They pulled me out of the stovepipe." And then he told this relative, he said, your horses are at this location. But he said they pulled him out of that stovepipes. So, you know, sometimes they do things like that, you know. And, but they don't do that to scare you. They just do those things to show you that there is somebody there. You know, somebody there answering your name.